Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about Eldrad Ulthran, the greatest Chad of 40k himself, and diving into why he's going to be a meta unit going forward in 10th edition. Yes, that's right, I do think Eldrad is going to be a more common pick after this balanced data slate is released, and I actually think he's pretty good now. If you know how to use him, you just need to think of him a little bit differently, a little bit more unconventionally than you would normally. Because if you just compare him to a Farseer, it seems like on paper he does a lot less, especially if you kind of have him just sitting in the backfield with some Guardians, He really doesn't do what a Farseer can do in the same position, and that's why you kind of have to rethink him a little bit. So we're going to talk about that in today's video and discuss the finer points of the biggest Chad and, of course, the biggest troll in the Warhammer 40k universe. So what are we going to be looking at in today's video? Well, particularly, we're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special rules of Eldrad, basically an overview of what he does and so forth. We're going to be looking at his strengths and weaknesses, his combos and synergies, of course, but also why you should include taking Eldrad in your list, and one especially dirty trick with him that will have your opponent rage. And truthfully, I've played him in a couple of casual games recently. Yes, I know they were more of a casual kind of game, but he was so powerful in them that I have to think that he would be pretty good in certain competitive settings as well. And I'll go into why later in this video. And lastly, we will be looking at the role Eldrad plays in an Eldar army, and of course, how to make the most out of him. So looking at Eldrad's basic stat line, he has an average movement at 7 inches, which is pretty decent, it's nothing spectacular, it's nothing to write home about. He's about as fast as any other Farseer. He's slightly tougher than a Farseer though, with toughness 4 and 5 wounds, and he still has a 4+ invul save. So he's not as tough as he was last edition, unfortunately. He doesn't have that, ancient rune armor, but he is still a little bit tougher than a regular Farseer. As far as his ranged weapons, he has the Mighty Mind War. So this is an 18-inch anti-character 4+ precision weapon with strength 5, AP -2, and D6 damage. Really good against characters. Basically, any character is wounded on a 4+, but most lesser characters are going to be wounded on a 3 because it is still strength 5. Which is really good, and it just makes Eldrad really versatile in what he can target and what he can take out. And of course, it is psychic, so if your opponent has any kind of, psychic defense, they will be able to use it against this attack, sadly. He does also have a shuriken pistol for secondary objectives, and this is, again, another model you might not think is good for secondaries, but he can always, pull off a secondary if he's out on his own. Which I think is probably one of the best ways to run Eldrad, is just on his own, and we'll talk about why a little bit later. Now, in addition to his ranged Mind War, he does have the Staff of Ulthamar and the Witchblade. So together, this combination is more powerful. It has anti-infantry 2+, 3 attacks, strength 5, AP -1, damage 2. So Eldrad is a bit better than a regular Farseer in combat. Wounds most units on 3+. He can kill Marines pretty decently. Not super great, but, better than, a Farseer or a Warlock. As far as his abilities go, he does generate an additional 3 fate dice for you at the beginning of the game. And I think if, GW ever decides to mess with the amount of fate dice we get, Eldrad will be a better pick for that. He also can give you +1 to wound because he can mark a target at the beginning of the shooting phase. It's, of course, the Mighty Doom, and you can get +1 to wound against that target. And this is for the remainder of the turn, so it doesn't only work with shooting, but also close combat. So there's a lot of close combat units in our army that could, use a little bit of a harder punch. Things like Howling Banshees, things like Striking Scorpions, etc. And Eldrad can help that unit hit a little bit harder. But to be real with you guys, it's mostly going to be used to boost our pretty immense amount of shooting. Shuriken cannons are really good with this again. Getting +1 to wound means we're going to be wounding Marines on 2+. So, having that option of getting that +1 to wound does increase the damage of our army quite a lot. Now, the weakness of this, of course, is that you need line of sight. And a lot of times, if you're in the backfield, with a squad of Guardians or just hiding behind ruins in your own deployment zone, you're not going to get the best opportunities to use this. And basically, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, when we think about Eldrad, we think about running him in the back. You know, that's what we did last edition with him, right? He was basically a Farseer support caster, would sit in the back, hide, and, you know, buff your army with Guide and Fortune and things like that. And although he can join Guardians and a Warlock Conclave, I truthfully think he works best purely solo dolo, on his own, and that's it. And that's basically because I think he just has a clearly different role than both Storm Guardians and Guardian Defenders. You don't really want to put him with either unit because he kind of takes away from what that unit already does, and he doesn't really add a lot to the unit itself. And that's essentially why I don't think he's really good with either of those units. Yes, they're a bodyguard for him and so forth, but oftentimes he won't really need one with what I'm going to suggest and how I'm going to suggest you play Eldrad in your games. A Warlock Conclave can be a good idea, maybe a small little Conclave for him, but it is 60 points, and I feel like, you know, having 2 Warlocks for 60 points is a little bit expensive. You know, I mean, that's a squad of Rangers, you know what I mean? So, you know, for not that much survivability. So I think you should probably hedge your bets with Eldrad and just run him solo. As far as his points cost, he is 110 points, which isn't cheap, but he does come with some powerful abilities. Again, Doom is very powerful. The Fate dice isn't as good, but it may be better if, you know, GW decides to nerf Fate dice for whatever reason. Personally, I don't think they should. I don't think that's the real problem here, but, you know, who knows what GW does. And if they do end up doing that, that ability is going to be very useful. As far as his keywords go, he has the infantry keyword and the epic hero keyword. So he can move through ruins and buildings and stuff like that, no problem, due to the infantry keyword. But he cannot take enhancements because, of course, he's an epic hero. So a lot of people write him off at this point because he can't take the Phoenix gem, but I actually think he doesn't really need it for the role that he performs on the battlefield. All right, so I did also want to bring this up, and that is Eldrad's lore. So Eldrad is such a cool Farseer. He's, you know, he has a special place in my heart because he's actually one of the first models I ever bought for the Eldar. As a matter of fact, he is one of the first purchases I made. I purchased a unit of Guardians. They came in, you know, units of 16 back then. I purchased 16 Guardians. I purchased Eldrad, and I purchased a single Warwalker. And that was my first 500-point army. Back then, everything was really expensive. So, you know, 16 Guardians, Eldrad Ulthran, and a Warwalker was about 500 points. So I was pretty much already at 500 points with just that. But, you know, that's one of my first HQ models that I ever owned for the Eldar. So he's really, you know, he holds a special place in my heart. So he is one of the most badass characters in the 40K universe, and he's often overlooked by a lot of, you know, lore people and stuff like that because, you know, quite frankly, he's not a Space Marine. So there's a lot of people out there that just don't really take notice of him, but he's really cool, and he has had a really big, deep effect on the 40K universe. And I think this bit of lore is a little bit cool. I read through this the other day, and I thought it was really neat. So I want to go ahead and read this for you guys, just to give you guys, you know, some inspiration to use Eldrad on the battlefield. One of the most powerful Eldari Psykers ever to have lived. When Eldrad Ulthran takes to the field, his enemy's plans are already known to him. Such is Eldrad's psychic might that he can break titans and banish the mightiest of demons. And over the millennia, he has slain kings and champions beyond number. And I think this actually goes into why they gave him Mind War, right? Like, the lore actually just fits the abilities that they gave him, Doom and Mind War, because he can just go out there and kill characters, right? He's very good at that with the Mind War psychic power. But as good as Eldrad is, he can't do things that are not on his data sheet. So I do want to kind of clarify this because a lot of people have asked me this question over the months and stuff like that. And at first, I didn't really know either, you know, but I have a clear idea of it now. So I'll try to explain it to you guys who maybe don't know how this works. So Branching Fates is a ability that Farseers have, Farseers and Farseer Skyrunners, which allows you, whenever you use a Fate dice, to turn that result into a 6 if you are within 12 inches of a Farseer model. Now, a Farseer model can include the Farseer, a Farseer Skyrunner, or Eldrad. But he cannot use it himself, so Eldrad cannot use this himself, because he does not have the ability on his datasheet Only Farseers and Farseer Skyrunners can use it because they have the ability on their datasheet. And this is exactly what the ability states. Once per turn, when you use a fate dice to substitute a roll made for a model or unit within 12 inches of a Farseer model from your army, one model from your army with this ability, and that's the key part right there, with this ability, can use it. So the only thing that Eldrad is eligible to do is act as a beacon for the ability because he does not have the ability itself. But he can act as a beacon for it because he does have the Farseer keyword, so that does allow him to kind of, be able to use it within 12 inches. So theoretically, the way you could do this is if you had a Farseer in the backfield and Eldrad was somewhere else on the battlefield and you wanted to use Branching Fates, you could measure it from Eldrad, but the Farseer himself would be using the ability. And of course, this has a lot more limited applications than people initially thought. People initially thought, oh, if I take Eldrad, of course I can just use Branching Fates because it's on the Farseer datasheet. And it says any Farseer can use it. Well, no, it's actually just the Farseer that has the ability. It's not Eldrad. But you can use Eldrad as a bit of a beacon for the ability. So in other words, you can measure from Eldrad. You just can't use the actual ability from Eldrad because he doesn't have it, right? So I know he's the most powerful Farseer in the galaxy, but he can't do it all. Okay, so what are Eldrad's strengths and weaknesses? So first of all, his biggest strength, I think, is the fact that he can just debuff a unit with +1 to wound for your entire army, right? That's incredibly powerful, and it's at the start of the shooting phase, so you can use it from reserve, and you can use it out of a transport. And it's a pretty awesome buff regardless. Mind War is extremely effective against enemy characters, especially those without an invulnerable save. So a character with a 4-up invul is going to be, 50-50 is going to be fine. But even so, 50-50 is pretty good odds for a character that's only 110 points and can theoretically kill a 6-wound character fairly easily. And again, remember that you are getting a reroll to hit and a reroll to wound because you are part of the Unparalleled Foresight detachment. So you're getting that ability with Eldrad regardless. If the opponent doesn't have an invul save, however, it's basically a guaranteed kill, especially on toughness 4 or squishy characters. So even though you do need line of sight, it is a very powerful ability in its own right. And of course, against weaker support type characters, it's absolutely brutal against them. He's also decent in combat. He's not the greatest, but he can hold his own against a number of weaker units, which normal Farseers typically cannot. So if your opponent in the late game tries to throw a couple of Space Marines at him, just tie him up or anything like that, Eldrad can pretty easily dispatch, 1 or 2 Space Marines a turn with 2+ to wound and of course, damage 2 and AP -1. However, he does have his weaknesses. He can't take enhancements, which I think is probably the biggest weakness of Eldrad. Not being able to take the Phoenix Gem is pretty tough, especially since he most of the time wants to be on his own. And his ability to add fate dice isn't great value at the moment, but like I said in the beginning of the video and a little bit after that as well, if fate dice are nerfed in any way, the amount of fate dice and stuff like that, then it will be a much better ability. Alright, so what are his combos and synergies? So obviously Doom works especially well with a variety of damage dealing units. I mentioned Windrider jet bikes earlier, but also things like Shroud Runners, right? Anything that you're, relying on precision for. So I mentioned in a previous video, the Canoptic Wraith Blob with the, Cryptek in it. That Cryptek is going to be getting toughness 6 against your precision weapons because of the, Canoptic Wraiths. So having Doom on that unit could make your snipers hit a lot harder and more reliably if, for whatever reason, Mind War fails. Another nice little trick that I like to use is when my opponent has a really good armor save, but maybe not an invul save itself. Mind War combined with Blade Storm gives you AP -4 against characters, and again, it is anti-character 4+, so that means critical hits on 4+, which means Blade Storm will proc. So basically against anything with a 3+ save, or worse, they're getting no save, and against something with a 2+ save, they're only getting a measly 6-up save. So if the character doesn't have an invul save, they're just, quite frankly, out of luck. And, of course, when he charges in, he can use Epic Challenge as well, giving him anti-infantry 2+ precision. So, is it likely that it'll kill a character like this? Probably not. AP -1 isn't great, but it is an extra chance to kill that character if you had failed to kill him with Mind War or other weapons. So why should you consider taking Eldrad in your list? So he's a great damage multiplier that helps your army crack tough targets like the ones that enjoy taking mid-board objectives. And, if your army doesn't have the tools to successfully crack these units open, especially if you're fighting against an army that has multiple of these units, it's going to be very hard to win on that primary objective game. So having something in your army that can debuff an enemy unit is quite good. Mind War also destroys infantry characters without invulnerable saves very well. So again, those support characters that are going to be trying to, buff those units on those objectives, or, maybe the damage multiplier type characters that are in the backfield, like Imperial Guard commanders and stuff that are going to be passing out orders to Imperial Guard units, are very vulnerable to Mind War. And even with things like Feel No Pain, a lot of people say, well, what about Feel No Pain? It does D6 damage, but they're going to get a 5+ Feel No Pain against it. Most support characters that give their units Feel No Pain actually just have 4 wounds. So if you use a Fate dice to boost the damage to 6, on average dice, now of course your opponent could roll well, but on average dice, if they fail whatever invul save they have, 5+, 6+, whatever, they're also going to need to pass at least 3 Feel No Pains to be able to survive that attack. So it is very likely that your Mind War will be able to kill a character pretty easily. So you actually have a pretty good chance of killing that character, again, unless you're unlucky, but, like I said before, you're getting 2+ to hit with a reroll, 4+ to wound with a reroll, sometimes 3+ to wound with a reroll. And then if you use a Fate dice for the damage, they have to not only pass their armor or invul save, which is probably going to be a 5+ or 6+, but they also have to pass multiple Feel No Pains, at least 3 Feel No Pains if they have it, on a 5+ to be able to survive. And that's, again, only if they actually have that. And also, because Doom activates in the shooting phase, you can use it the turn you come from reserves or get out of a transport, which is really flexible. And again, actually, Eldrad benefits from Doom himself. So that example I gave you earlier of the 3+ to wound, sorry guys, I meant 2+ to wound, because of course, unless you roll a 1, you're going to be able to benefit from Doom, which is really good against toughness 4 characters or below, which is going to be a vast majority of the support characters out there. And normally, Eldrad, if you use them in the back with Guardians and so forth, you're not going to have the best targets, so being able to use it in the shooting phase is a really powerful ability, especially if you bring them out from reserve or bring them out from a transport, which I think is probably the best way to go about this. So having said that, I want to share with you guys one dirty trick with Eldrad that will have your opponent rage. And basically, it's a 4-step process. Step 1 is you put Eldrad solo in reserve. Now, this does a couple of things. First of all, Eldrad can already benefit from the extra Fate dice. You're getting extra Fate dice still, but he's in reserve, so your opponent doesn't know where he's going to come in, so has to prepare for him accordingly. It's very easy for an opponent to hide characters behind ruins and things like that from, the units in your own deployment zone, but it's much harder to hide characters from units that are coming in from strategic reserve, either behind them or from the sides of the board. So step 2 is you bring Eldrad out of reserve either on turn 2 or turn 3, obviously preferably turn 2, but sometimes that's not quite possible or a good idea. And then you bring him in line of sight to an enemy unit, but also near some ruins, preferably an enemy unit with a character in it, but you don't always have to do that, just depends on the situation. Step 3, you use Doom, then you fire off a Mind War to eliminate a supporting character or other character in the unit. Again, with Doom, if you're not using the anti-character, you're getting a 3+ to wound against most characters in the game. Unless they are extremely tough, in which case you probably do want the anti-character, which Doom won't affect, but you'll still at least get a 4+ rerollable, which still gives you pretty good odds of being able to wound. It's a 75% chance with a reroll, so still good odds there. And then you use other units to wipe out the weakened unit after that character's wiped out. So all those survival buffs that character was giving the enemy unit are now going to be gone, and your units can rip them apart. Now, step 4 is where it gets really funny, because your opponent will see what Eldrad did and will immediately try to go after him, but might not actually have that many tools at their disposal to kill him. So you use Phantasm, and you just move him behind the ruins and out of line of sight. Because he's a character and he's very small, you can easily hide him behind ruins, and because he's infantry, he's easy to move through them. And after that, you can take a load off, have a good laugh, and be happy that you played Eldrad in a very lore-friendly way. And it's actually funny because I played a game last week against my Chaos Space Marines buddy in the group. We were both playing, not super competitive lists, but probably more semi-competitive lists. I brought Eldrad. He brought a Dark Commune, thinking that he could hold an objective with it for at least one turn, because they have a 5+ invul save, they have Feel No Pain, they have a bunch of wounds and so forth. But Eldrad went in there, doomed them, Mind Ward the Dark Commune leader, killed him off, and then Wind Riders swept around the corner and iced the rest. And he was a little bit upset because he did expect the Rangers. He knew that the Rangers were going to be pretty much probably ineffective against a Dark Commune leader because he was hidden, out of line of sight. But unfortunately, he could not hide him from every direction. And when Eldrad came in from Strategic Reserve, that was pretty much it for that Dark Commune leader. I can't exactly remember what he's called, but he's the cult leader. I'm forgetting his name. But anyway, there's a model within the Dark Commune that is responsible for giving the unit the 5+ invul save, and that's the model I killed with Mind War. So really powerful, and I think basically the best role that Eldrad can play in your army is being an assassin. So he's an assassin and a damage multiplier meant to help your army eliminate really tough targets, things like the Dark Commune, things like the Necron Canoptic Wraith Blob, stuff like that. Being able to use his abilities the turn he comes from reserve or out of a transport also makes him a lot harder to hide from, especially if coming out of reserve, because you can basically pick where and when you come in. And of course, with a little bit of patience, if you do wait till turn 3, if you don't get a good opportunity turn 2, you can come in from your opponent's deployment zone. And Eldrad has a pretty good range as well. Range 18 can probably get you within range of the 2 side objectives in No Man's Land. And with support characters on the rise, Eldrad could be a clutch unit going forward, and dare I say, even a good choice for competitive play. The meta is shifting. People are using more supporting characters. Necrons are on the rise. Necrons rely on supporting characters like Cryptex and things like that to buff their units. So Eldrad could be a clutch choice in those situations. And of course, he's still always useful even if you're not fighting an army with a lot of support characters, because Doom is an incredibly powerful debuff and damage multiplier. So in conclusion, while the less popular choice over the Farseer, Eldrad definitely has some effective applications if you're willing to look outside of the box a little bit. Doom and Mind War are both very powerful abilities, and also putting him in reserve can make him really hard to deal with and essentially know where he's going to come from. And that's bad news for a lot of supporting characters out there who like to hide behind ruins from your other precision weapons, things like sniper rifles and stuff that probably won't have line of sight within the first couple of turns of the game. So definitely consider running Eldrad in your list. He's not just an inferior Farseer. I think he does have a role in an Eldar army, and it's looking like Eldrad is going to be a more, competitive unit going forward as well. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and thank you so much to my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months. I greatly appreciate the support. It has helped the channel grow so much and helped the community grow as well. So once again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for supporting. If you do want to help support the channel, I have free trials activated for Patreon, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategies, tactics, and of course hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, or you want to grab some Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page to rep your local game store, I will leave the links to those in the description as well. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Looking forward to that balanced data slate. It's probably going to be a doozy, but I will walk you through it every step of the way, and I will see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.